I'll be the token English speaker on the panel, I suppose. The reason I think that they asked me to be involved in this, Beatrice asked me kindly enough to be involved, and Oscar and Carlos, is because Venezuela is perhaps the best example of what Oscar is the point that Oscar is making in this latest edition of his book. Of the 5 countries, it is the one that has gone a different route over the last decade and a half, and the effects are obvious. As if in the 20th century we needed any more examples. We have Germany, which was split in half, and you have one side that adopted communism and produced perhaps one of the most awful cars, the Trabant, in the world, whereas you have the other half of Germany that adopted a more capitalist system and democracy and produced Mercedes-Benz. So as if we needed more examples, you have Korea, where we just kind of drew a line between the two halves, and you see where one is beyond a third world country, and the other one is chasing on the heels of producing some of the great products of the world. Venezuela, by the same token, is a perfect example that if you take a country that has the world's largest oil reserves, 300 trillion barrels, more than Saudi Arabia, and if you take a country with more oil reserves, with that kind of wealth, in addition to natural mineral wealth, diamonds and gold and silver, bauxite and iron ore, even special metals that are needed for transistors and science and technology, and you take that country and you install communism or a Cuban variant of communism, you can bring it to the brink of bankruptcy. And that is in a synopsis, what Oscar manages to achieve in his book, and has been indeed since his thesis at Georgetown. It has been a continuing theme in his life in terms of what is causing Latin America to fail and what policies are causing it to fail. But beyond that, what he points out in Transformation is that the key ingredients that make those countries succeed, whether they be Mexico, Argentina, come on in, we're all family. Whether it be Argentina, Brazil, Chile, or Mexico, or Venezuela, the key ingredients that make it succeed are things like a consumer society, so people want to go out and buy more clothes. Like you've all, I can guarantee, probably bought a new item of clothing in the past 30 days, in the past month. In Venezuela right now, that is very difficult to even do that. Not only is there nothing being produced, even the simplest garments in the country which should be able to produce those things, they can't afford to import them. The average wage in Venezuela now is 11,500 bolivars per month. Now that may sound a lot when you put 1,000 on the end of something. Come on in. Make yourself known. Okay. That's good. So 11,500 bolivars per month at the black market rate of almost 1,100, almost 1,090 right now. The black market rate means that the average Venezuelan that the majority of Venezuela lives on is making $10.50 a month. That is not even half of what Cuba is making. So now you see why they're not being able to have a consumer society, which was a consumer society, not being able to afford anything. You can't buy a sweater for $10 a month, much less travel abroad to see that things are better, much less feed your family. So we have a growing situation, a growing crisis, and I'm pleased to say that Washington is coalescing on trying to figure out what they can do to help, and there are meetings to that effect in DC next week. The other thing that Oscar points out is property rights, and that the property rights are one of the key ingredients across the countries, and he points it out in several graphs, that is helping. In many countries, and with property rights, really when we say property rights, of course, when indentured servants came to America, they said yes. They signed a paper and they said, I will work for 5 years for nothing for you, but at the end of 5 years, I will have 100 acres. You will give me 100 acres. And people came to America and did that. Latin America conquistadors were given property and then put people on the property, but it was never given to them. So they just worked it. So the system started out badly. But what we mean by property rights is the rule of law, and it's something that Beatrice has made a very important part of her work over the last decades in terms of enforcing the rule of law. I'm pointing out that when there is a lack of rule of law, when there is a lack of respect for private property, when there is a lack of respect for all the other rules that make the secret sauce of capitalism and democracy, then you have failure. And you have a failed system, which is what Venezuela is experiencing compared to Mexico, or even the problems with the breakdown of rule of law in Brazil that we're currently seeing. But at least the institutions in Brazil are working to try and correct their problem. In Venezuela, that rule of law has been so gummed up that the process is not working at all. Finally, I would like to add that the other thing that he points out in terms of the graph, in terms of GDP, is really the underlying part of it in terms of production is the work ethic. And the work ethic in many Latin American countries, it's not geography, but the lack of work ethic, especially in countries that have adopted a communism system where people get the same piece of pie whether they come to work or whether they don't, has caused a problem specifically in Venezuela, for example, where you can't fire anyone for anything. So you can't fire innocent people. Don't come to work. They don't need to come to work because you can't get rid of them. So they come and they get their paycheck and then they go. So there's been a total breakdown of those key elements, those key special sauces that have made things work, and that's the basic important information that I, as a person who focuses on those countries that Oscar has so diligently trafficked in and tracked for decades, and gathered. Beatrice?